What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane and asks the question, what if? I'm your host, Jim Montgomery, and I just want to say before we get in, I'm very excited about the show we have for today, but I have no idea what the sound is like right now, if it even sounds right. It was sounding pingy. If you were here right before I started recording, I had a Bill O'Reilly moment. Fuck it, we'll do it live. So if it doesn't sound right, I apologize. I'm finding that the video is having better sound than the audio, which never happens. I need a Baba Booey. But anyway, very, very excited about this show in the sense that I learned a lot in the prep this week leading up to it. And like I always knew about the topic, but some of the intricate details, I was very shocked and surprised to hear. So, before we get into that, quick update on the state of the Philadelphia sports teams. Phillies, always quiet this week, and I think that's a good thing. They're still going to add some bullpen pieces and probably maybe a bench piece or two. But I think at this point, for them, it seems like a lot of the big names and the big moves and the big signings, they're kind of done. So I feel like once the dust settles, they'll start adding some of those pieces together. And I'm anxious to see how the rest of this roster plays out. They do have some young guys in the minors that could play big roles this year, both on the mound and in the field and at the plate. So they're not done yet, but I'm loving where they are so far. So quiet week this week for the Phils and letting everybody else. They went out and got their guys, which I love, and now it's up to the other teams to deal with the leftovers. I think if you would have asked them at the beginning of free agency, as soon as the World Series ended, Dombrowski probably had these guys tabbed as these are the guys I want. He got them. Now you get to sit back, enjoy the holidays, let everybody else feed on the leftovers, let the dust settle, and then make your moves for some of those other ads there. Even the guy they got I forget his name now, but even the guy they got in the Plan B draft or the Rule 5, Plan B was the old NFL thing, the Rule 5 draft, actually, I'm excited about him, the pitcher, and I forget his name, but he was a young guy who was in either the Marines or the Army, and he had however they got him, they played the rules correctly, and I mean this guy is going to be, it looks like he's going to be a stud, and he's going to be disciplined because of having the military background and everything. So, looking forward to that. Sixers currently have the 5th seed. I mentioned it this morning on this day in Philly sports history that they're a game and a half out of that 3rd spot, as well as a game and a half out of the 8th spot. So they're good, especially with Joel and James Harden playing very well since Harden has come back. Of course, you have Maxey coming back in a couple weeks, but there's still Doc is doing Doc things. But now we have these knuckleheads out there, and I don't know who they are, that somehow it's gotten to Joe that, Philly fans, they want me traded and they do this and do that. And like, I'm still, even on Twitter, like you have your knuckleheads, but I'm not seeing a lot of people are saying like, hey, in my group of friends, and I have season tickets and in my section, and who are you? If you're one of the people that is a true Philly fan that are saying that the Sixers need to trade Joel Embiid, show your face. Who are you? Because I feel like I'm not hearing it. I'm not seeing it. Of course, I stay away from Philly sports talk radio, mainly because of knuckleheads like these guys who are calling in and saying the vocal minority, like, oh, we need to trade Joel Embiid, blah, 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 blah. Whatever. Like, so I'm not seeing it. I'm looking. I think Friday night he's going to get a huge standing ovation from the crowd down at the Wells Fargo Center, and I get over it, Joe. Like, honestly, don't let these negative trolls, basically, you call yourself Troll Embiid sometimes on Twitter, don't let them get to you. The Flyers are currently 27th out of 32 in the NHL, which, excuse me, they need to be They need to drop 2 more spots to kind of have a better shot at one of those top 3 picks. Still a lot of season left, so we're happy with where they are, and we'll continue. Again, we want to see Carter Hart playing well, which he has been. You want to see the young guys stepping up, but then that's it. You want those losses to happen. Obviously, since the last time we spoke, the Eagles are 12-1, looking good. They're playing for seeding at this point, and basically they have a 3-game lead for the number 1 seed with 4 games left. Because they own the tiebreaker on the Vikings, they're technically up 2.5 games on the Cowboys because they still play one more time, but they did beat them. Big game coming up on Christmas Eve. I'm concerned and worried that they're going to overlook the Bears this weekend. But then after the whole Micah Parsons thing came out, like where he, in a way, called out Jalen Hurts and the way everybody responded to it, I don't know, man. They seem like they're locked in. So early in the week, I was worried about it. When that happened, like I think they might just – and I don't think Chicago is going to really be playing for much as they're kind of battling for draft pick placement. So I was concerned, and now that the week's going the way it has been, I'm not as concerned. I'll have more on them on this day in Philly sports history on Sunday when we do the pick and everything. Looking forward to it. And, I mean, that's what a way to start the Christmas holiday with Eagles-Cowboys. I'm wondering, I don't think they're going to flex that game, but I think that's the 4 o'clock game right now. And we're just going to have to – Santa's just going to have to be late. That's all I can say. But things are looking good now. And the past probably, I would say, if you go back to 2000, the past 22 years of Eagles football, for the most part, it's been good. And you've had the Andy Reid era. You've had those 5 NFC Championship games, Super Bowl 39. You had the end of the Andy Reid, Chip Kelly era was but then Chip did have a good first couple of years. It was that 3rd year when they gave him all the power that things started falling apart. Go right into Doug Peterson. All of a sudden, we won the Super Bowl. We make the playoffs a couple of years. Last, we had a down year or 2. Then Nick Sirianni came in, and now it's looking like we might go back to the Super Bowl. So ultimately, it's been a good run. There's a whole generation of people or kids in Philadelphia who don't know the Negadelphia. They don't know the chokes. They don't know necessarily the Buddy Ryan days when they were just unfulfilled expectations. They've seen a championship within the first 20 years of their lifetime. It wasn't always like that. And we're going to go back today to 1984, which probably there's been some lean times in Eagles history, but this year in particular may have been the low point, I would say, of Eagles history. And not necessarily because of what the product they were putting on the field. I mean, by 1984, they were 4 years removed from being in the Super Bowl. They had a playoff appearance, I believe, the next year. And then they started, the guys got older. You had the 49ers starting to go on their upward trajectory. And there was all teams, like Washington was getting better. The Giants were getting better. Eagles were still somewhat competitive, but they weren't the heavy favorites and everything like they were. But, I mean, it was still, they were a big draw in Philadelphia. Their owner was Leonard Tost, who took over in 1969. And this is one of the things I learned. He had always been a lifelong Eagles fan. And I believe he was a real estate guy is how he made his money. But he was from Bridgeport, which is right outside of King of Prussia. If you're from this area, you know exactly where Bridgeport is. It's just right down from the mall in between King of Prussia and Norristown. And he was the owner. Die-hard Eagles fans. Always loved them. But he did the unthinkable late in the season in 1984. And that's what our topic today is going to be. There was a time, believe it or not, when the Eagles almost moved to Phoenix. And I know a lot of you probably know that. I don't know if you know the whole story. So I'm going to spend some time, and this is where both of my podcasts sort of cross over somewhat. This is going to be somewhat of a history lesson, but we're going to get into the what if and talk about basically what could have been had the Eagles moved. And the reason the topic is this week is because today was the day when all of this basically went December 15th. This is when, for lack of a better way to put it, the shit hit the fan. And the Eagles were basically 95% of the way to Phoenix at this point. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people, I always knew, okay, he almost moved and the city came in, helped out last minute. But I don't think anybody realized just how close the Eagles were to being into Phoenix. And that's what I want to get into. And everybody knows that Leonard Tost was deep in debt from his gambling, drinking, his divorces, mainly his gambling. I mean, he liked to drink, go down and play blackjack, and he was just not a good blackjack player. And I read an article, and it was funny trying to figure out which type of blackjack player was he. Was he the guy that split tens and hit on 18, or he was the guy that just stayed on 16? Like, there's just many different ways to people were questioning it. But Phoenix was the logical choice when he started thinking about moving the team and basically trying to recoup some of his losses, because not only did he have the gambling problem, but a lot of the owners took a big hit because there was an NFL strike in 1982. So they took a big hit with that. Compound that with the gambling, the drinking, and the divorces, and that's where you have Leonard Tost looking to make some money, whether that's selling the team, moving the team, or whatever. And ultimately, he had a guy in Phoenix that was going to buy 25% of the team, under the assumption then that he would move Tost would still be the majority owner, but in order for that guy said, I'll buy 25% of the team, which would have been enough to wipe out all of his debt, but you got to relocate them to Phoenix. And Phoenix at the time was kind of like the hot spot where everybody was moving. I remember my uncle had friends who had moved out there, and I never understood why they moved out to Arizona. And now looking at it today, like, that was a hell of a move and a genius thing to do in the 80s, because at the time I think Phoenix was the 99th largest market, or 99th largest city, I should say. Not, I'm thinking in terms of media, but the 99th largest city. Now they're top 5. And I believe it's Philly and Phoenix keep alternating that 5th and 6th spot, depending on what the census does. So it was exploding, and it was considered an untapped market. Like, nobody was really going out there when it came to sports. And I mean, professionally, they had the Suns, who were a huge draw out there. They would average 11,000 fans at a time when that wasn't happening in the NFL or the NBA. Teams were not averaging big, as much as basketball was huge in the 80s. Unless you were like, we talk all the time on This Day in Philly Sports History about the 80s. Basically, it was the Sixers, Celtics, and Lakers were the 3 teams. And so if you weren't one of those 3 teams at the time, you weren't drawn. But the Suns, they averaged 11,000 fans a game. Like, they were well above the league average. Football-wise, they had the USFL was big for a couple years as a spring sport or spring football alternative to the NFL. And Arizona had the Wranglers, who averaged 25,000 fans per game. And it doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards. However, think about this. They were one of the worst teams in the USFL. They played outside, not in a dome. They played outside in the spring and summer in Arizona. And they still averaged 25,000 fans. I don't even like to walk to my truck when it's 90 degrees. I'm not sitting in the hot sun baking watching a football game. So kudos to Wrangler fans. And trust me, everybody says, oh, the weather. No, I'm never leaving this area because I like the summer, but I hate the temperature. Days like this when it's snowy and cold, I love. Give that to me all the time. Like you can have your 90 degrees, and I've been in Vegas. Or I've been actually in Arizona. It's a dry heat my ass. 95 or 105 degrees is 105 degrees. I don't care if it's dry, wet, whatever. It's fucking hot. Anyway, back to Phoenix. The Colts almost moved there before they went to Indianapolis. This is interesting to me too, especially with this list of teams. The Vikings, Dolphins, and Saints all almost moved out there. The Cardinals had threatened to move out there before, and we know they ultimately ended up moving out to Phoenix. The Falcons also looked into moving. And I think what happened with this was he was trying to be hush-hush about it, and whether or not he was trying to use it as leverage for getting the city to do this or upgrade the vet, whatever it was, nobody really knew. And it was kind of like, well, he said this, and he said, and obviously everybody's lying about it. The city's saying one thing, Leonard Tost is saying another. But again, it wasn't supposed to be known, I guess. Somehow the media got wind of it, that these secret talks and everything were going, and all hell broke loose. And Toast is like, I'm not doing, I'm not doing this, this, that, and the other. The NFL is saying, well, they have a lease, and the way the lease was set up at the vet, which was interesting to know, it basically, the way it was worded was the Eagles were not, because they had signed it legally, they were not allowed to play a home game that was not in Philadelphia. And we talked during the World Series on one of the This Day in Philly Sports History that there was a game that the Eagles and Dallas had to switch home games because the Phillies were in the World Series. So Toast, through his lawyers, were saying that, well, because we switched that game, it basically made the lease null and void. Like, it was crazy, but nobody thought the Eagles could move from Philadelphia. But I think what in the back of everybody's mind, they had what happened to the Colts, where in the middle of the night, they moved everything from Baltimore to Indianapolis. So it was definitely interesting, but Wilson Goode, who was the mayor, had gotten involved and was saying, listen, what do we need? Like trying to discuss. And he was able, and this is something that I was unaware of as somebody who lived in Philadelphia and heard the stories about Wilson Goode. I mean, he was the guy that ordered the bomb, the whole the movement where he bombed the people in his city on Osage Avenue. And I just assumed he was a horrible mayor, but he played a big role in keeping the Eagles in Philadelphia. So like he basically had an agreement and basically did the media tour. He was on the NFL Today on CBS and basically said, no, they're not. He gave me his word, this, that, and the other. They're staying. But secretly, apparently, he had Leonard Tost had a handshake agreement with the dude, and basically in Arizona, they were trying to figure out and getting all the details and whatnot set up so that they could move there. They had to work it out with Arizona State. They had to work it out with the Wranglers in the USFL. They had to work it out with, are they going to build a stadium and all that. And the crazy thing is, I didn't even know this. Leonard Tost was so far in debt that, and he was a drunk, and it kind of, let me take that back. I shouldn't say he was a drunk. I apologize to his family, but it's well known that he liked to drink a lot and he liked his gambling and everything. But so much so that he even tried to trade franchises. Like he tried to basically trade the Eagles for the Bills straight up with Ralph Wilson, who was the owner of the Bills. So even though he's telling Wilson Goode this thing, he's telling the guy that he's making the deal with to sell the team another thing. Who knows what this dude was thinking? And It was a done deal, though, apparently, and it was all set to happen after their last game, which was, I believe, December 17th down in Atlanta against the Falcons. And then this is when, again, Wilson Goode was going on NFL Today on CBS and saying, no, he's telling me this. The newspapers are saying he's telling me this. Late the night of the 15th, I think, or the 16th, it leaked to the Philly media that, dude, this is a done deal. Like, they're going, as soon as this game's over, they're going to Atlanta. And it was just a mess. So now you got because of this, the NFL stepping in, and Pete Rozelle and the other owners didn't want the Eagles to leave. Obviously, they wanted to be in Philly for obvious reasons. And I did find this one good. Ironically, Art Modell, who is the guy who ripped the Browns away from Cleveland to move to Baltimore, he was the most vocal against the Eagles moving to Philadelphia. And it's just funny how 10, 15 years later, he did the exact same thing. But behind the scenes then, Wilson Goode was getting people that were willing to loan money to help build the luxury boxes, to help make more revenue on Eagles games. He restructured the lease where they didn't have to pay rent for 10 years. But basically, he secured all this money, but then there was the holdup that Leonard Tost cannot be in control of the team. Because, and if you think about it, you have a guy who's a gambler, a guy who's a drinker, a guy who's trying to do whatever he can to get some of those losses back. You don't want him in charge of your investment. So they said, listen, we'll loan you guys the money under the assumption that Tost has nothing to do with the team. So you had the basically Philadelphia's offer. Everything else on the Phoenix end was approved. They worked out the stadium things. He had the deal for the 25%. And it came down to Tost. And it was basically back and forth. And I guess he gave the city of Philadelphia the chance to kind of redo and make their offer a little sweeter. But Wilson Goode said, and every day that we don't have an agreement, it's just the Eagles are one step closer to moving. And so you're leading up to this game. Nobody knows what's going on. Media leaking. And remember, there was no social media or a 24-hour news cycle by then. So you basically, people had didn't even have cell phones. So you're calling people on their house phones and things like that. So nobody knew. So everything was delayed. I couldn't imagine. It probably was a mess. So they were in intense meetings. I believe it was in City Hall in Philadelphia on December 15th then. And every hour, Wilson Goode would come out and give updates. He was like, we don't have any update. I'll give an update in an hour. We don't have any update. And finally, I guess it wasn't going well. And he said, I'll be out by 10 o'clock with the final answer one way or the other. If they're not staying by 10 o'clock, they're going to Phoenix. So it didn't look good. 10 o'clock came, no Wilson Goode. And everybody's, obviously all the media is outside the office trying to figure out what's going on. Finally, at 10:45, Wilson Goode comes out and says Leonard Tost agreed to the conditions. Basically, they're going to take all that money. They're going to loan it. He's not to be in charge of the Eagles anymore. And I think ultimately that led him to trying to basically sell the team. And I mean, from everything I watched, and read and just kind of research going to this, I don't know what changed, because this basically was a done deal that the Eagles were in Phoenix. And I don't know whether he got visited by the ghosts of Greasy Neal, Ron Jaworski, and Nick Foles that night, the ghosts of Eagles past, present, and future, and it kind of changed his mind. I mean, he did. I mean, he liked his whiskey, so maybe he was hallucinating. I don't know. But the fact that he did that 180 was amazing from everything I've heard. For all intents and purposes, the Eagles were going to Phoenix. And I think because of the move bombing, I think Wilson Goode, it sounds funny to say. I mean, the man bombed his own people in his own city. So let's keep that in mind. But I think I never knew how much of an integral part of keeping the Eagles in Philadelphia he was. But listen, kudos to Wilson Goode, who a couple years later bombed people in his own city. But hey, nobody's perfect, I guess. Ultimately, a few months later, I should say, Toast sold the Eagles to Norman Brayman, who was the used car dealer from. I shouldn't say used car. I don't know if it was used car. That was Buddy Ryan's words, not mine. But he was owned car dealerships down in Florida. We all know how that kind of worked out. He wasn't much better, but that's a whole other Back to the Future for a whole other time. But the point of all that was, and yes, that was a little bit longer of a background and historical kind of aspect of this, but there was just so many layers and so many moving parts to it, and nobody knew what was going on because nobody was sending Adam Schefter text about what was happening, and Ian Rappaport wasn't there to do this. So you were relying on phone calls and just basically whisper down the lane. So the fact that it was much closer to happening than what anybody ever thought, what I ever thought, just kind of blows my mind. So obviously for today, the what if is, what if the Eagles had moved to Phoenix? And truthfully, I think there's so many different ways you could go with this. I also don't think that Philly would have been without a team for that long. They were the fourth largest media market. But then again, LA went how many ever years without a team once the Rams and the Raiders moved. I think LA from a fan perspective, though, and Philly from a fan perspective, very, very different. I don't think the NFL would have left Philly without a team for that long. So who would have came in? Would it have been the Cardinals, who ultimately moved to Phoenix in 1988? Would the Cardinals have come to Philly? I mean, they started off in Chicago, moved to St. Louis. So, I mean, their whole history, they go back as long as the Eagles to the early days in the NFL. Maybe it was the Cardinals that came. Maybe it was the NFL, like an expansion team in 95, like the Jaguars or the Panthers. Maybe one of those two teams come in. You never know. Maybe they wait and it's sort of like one of those teams comes in, but it's like the Browns. Maybe they say, okay, Toast, you can take the franchise to Phoenix, but you're starting fresh as an expansion team. You take the team, the players, the organization, everything, but all the Eagles history, the logos, all of that stays in Philly until we're ready to expand. Maybe they do that. Because it is to me, like, even as I'm going through this and we'll get more into it, it's hard to imagine an NFL team in Philly not being the Eagles. I don't know how the Browns did it, and I'm glad we never had to deal with it, but it's just kind of an interesting thing to have a couple year basically break in your team's history. Also in 95, the Rams and the Raiders left LA, so maybe I don't think the Raiders had a shot. When they moved, they were going to Oakland. But the Rams ended up in St. Louis. Well, maybe they end up in Philly. Who knows? Again, maybe the Browns, who left to go to Baltimore, maybe Art Modell, and the biggest ironic plot twist ever, brings the Browns to Philly after he bitched at Toast for wanting to move the Eagles to Phoenix. Houston, the Oilers moved in 97 to Tennessee. Maybe they moved to Philly. You never know. And it's just, again, with a lot of these what ifs, there's just so many moving pieces and so many moving parts that it's hard to tell what could have happened. But I think it really upsets everything. And I think that movie with Ashton Kutcher was the butterfly effect. One thing sent so many ripples to so many different areas that it's crazy. Maybe the Eagles end up like the Houston Texans end up, like, who knows? And I mean, obviously those are like the NFL impacts or like the what if results of what it meant for the National Football League, but what would it meant to the fans? What would it meant to Philadelphia? What would it meant to this region? Because if you like, it goes back then. Like, I mean, it goes. We talked about it on this day in Philly sports history today. Today's the anniversary of the day that they booed and threw snowballs at Santa, and everybody still talks about it. So the Eagles, and the reason they did that was not because they hate Santa Claus and they hate Christmas and this, that, and the other. It's because they were pissed off at the team because they were mismanaged, and this is right before Leonard Tost, ironically enough, bought the team, but they were mismanaged. The coach was horrible. They actually had a shot to draft the best player in the draft, and they fucked it up. And everybody's like, oh, they threw snowballs at Santa. They booed Santa Claus. What they're missing there is the passion that goes into that. They did that because they cared about the team. Yes, it's a very silly and kind of funny way to show your love, but it's coming from a good spot. It's coming from that passion and that love for the team. So you're basically, the fans were furious and just very upset, I think, more than anything. And like, two guys went to Leonard Tost's house to knock on his door and leave him a note. When he didn't answer, he called the cops. The cops came and they're like, look, we're not trying to break anything. We're not trying to hurt him. We just want to talk to him and say, please don't take our Eagles from Philly. And I think for a lot of people, and it's funny because I have this conversation with my wife all the time, a lot of people don't get and understand just how much the Eagles mean to this area and to the people of this area. For me, it was like just like a rite of passage. Like, that's what you did on Sundays. And still do. You watch the Eagles game. You talk about the Eagles game. You try not to get too excited when they win because you know they're going to break your heart. You bitch about them when they lose, and either way, you're having fun. You're eating. You're drinking beers. You're just having a good time. You're reminiscing. You're talking with family, and you're ripping that out. I mean, and that took, the Eagles were created in 1933, so it took all of that time. Would you have had that if one of those other teams? So say the St. Louis Cardinals moved here, and would they have had that? Would you have had that same? No, like, you would have had to build that up. An expansion team, like, yes, you're gonna love them, but like, you're gonna have that passion because it's like, you just got out of this huge long-term relationship where you were just madly in love, and then you start dating somebody. Like, are you gonna be like, no? As much as you try, it's not gonna be there. Like, that's what it is. Like, an Eagles fan, like, it just means you have that blind love for your team. And it's like, and this is where I think a lot of the negative things come from Eagles fans. It's like, yeah, I'm going to rip my team. I'm going to call them names. I'm going to bitch about them. But you dare say one thing about my Eagles, fuck you. I'm going to come after you. And I think it's crazy, and it's definitely more of a Northeast thing than anything. But we live and die. Like, so to take them away, and just imagining not having the Eagles, like, not growing up with those teams with Buddy Ryan the way I did, like, I don't know. And I'm not saying my whole life revolves around this, that, and the other, but, like, I don't think it would have been the same if it was the Cardinals, the Rams, the Raiders, the Browns, the Oilers, an expansion team. Like, it would not have been the same. And, like, I don't know. It's like, do you take the Yankees out of New York? Like, and I know that's maybe a stretch, but, like, that's the Red Sox out of Boston. Like, the Cubs out of Chicago. It's just unfathomable to think of. And it almost happened. Like, it 100% almost happened. And I think it could have gone either way. Like, I don't even know. Like, you could go down so many different rabbit holes on many different teams. And, I mean, does it change the outlook of the city? Like, do the other teams win? And, I mean, basically, I would think, like, they left. It has to be good for the Flyers, because the Flyers would probably be the closest thing to, like, NFL. And I look at Pittsburgh, for instance, and they have the Pirates, who have a rich history, and they have World Series. They had great players and all of this, But they're sort of like, hey, there's nothing to do on a Friday night in the summer. Let's go down to, oh my gosh, I've been working with too many Pittsburgh. I feel like I just said it like them down. Let's go down to the PNC Park and watch the Buccos. Where that's kind of what the Phillies are. And when the Phillies are good, that's a whole different thing. But I think the immediate impact would be the Flyers. I feel like the Flyers would have probably benefited the most because you would have had these fans that were starved for just action. And you're not going to necessarily see that with the Phillies. And just this also kind of coincided with the downfall of the Phillies. And the Sixers, people either like basketball or they don't. So you're also going to see, like, it's not going to be the same type of action as you would see with the Flyers. And also, this also coincided with the downfall of the Sixers as well. So the Flyers were kind of retooling around this time. This is right around when Pelle Lindbergh was going to be the Rookie of the Year the following year. So it would have been, I think, a massive, and I guarantee you Ed Snyder would have taken advantage of it and somehow made the Flyers even bigger in Philadelphia than what they are. But, I mean, it's crazy to even think that this almost happened. And not that long ago either. Like, 1984. I mean, and it's not like the Eagles were not drawing crowds. Like, the NFL in general back then was not necessarily, like, I mean, now for Eagle season tickets, the waiting list is, I want to say, it's something ridiculous, like 120 years, basically, because nobody gives them up. Like, I have some guys in my season ticket crew that, and we all have gone through it, where, like, between young kids and this, that, and the other, kids' sports, they're not able to go, but they're not giving those tickets up. Like, I have a waiting list of people that I know that want to get the tickets. It's probably 100 people long. Like, everybody I talk to when I tell them I have tickets, oh, if you ever get rid of tickets, I know it probably doesn't happen. And it really doesn't. 99% of the time, if somebody can't go, it goes within our group because that's when you take your wife down. It's when you take your son down. It's when you take your neighbor down, your dad, your uncle, your cousin, whoever. It's crazy. And I mean, it goes back to that was almost taken away from us by Leonard Tost. Like, it is our lifeline, or I shouldn't say lifeline, but it is what we do on Sundays. Like, I still, and one of the biggest arguments I have to this day after 14 years of being together with my wife, I plan what we do on Sundays around the Eagles game. And she knows when they're on buys or play Sunday night or Monday night because I'm way more agreeable. Oh, yeah, let's go to the pumpkin patch. She's like, they don't play this week, do they? I'm like, no, they play Monday night. Or she's like, let's go. Sure, let's go hang out and do this. Let's do yard work. They play Monday night, or they're on a bye this week, aren't they? I'm like, yeah, they are. But that's just what we do. And, like, it's hard to imagine the Eagles not being in Philly. I don't know, and maybe we would have. I don't know. Would we have had the same thing if it was the Cardinals? Like, hey, let's go to the Cardinals or an expand. Like the Panthers are here, and I'm sure the names would have been different. But I don't know. It's just hard to imagine the Eagles not being in Philly. But this week in 1984, it was basically a done deal. They were gone. And like I said, it was right near Christmas. Maybe the ghost of Greasy Neal and Ron Jaworski and Eagles' future Nick Foles came and visited Leonard Tost in one of his naps or something that day. But something changed his mind because they were a done deal. I've seen shirts. Like, if you do some Google searches, you can see shirts of the Phoenix Eagles with the old school Kelly green block lettering. It's very freaky. I'm getting chills kind of just thinking about it. But thank God Leonard Tost came to his senses. I never thought these words would ever come out of my mouth based on what I know about the history of the city of Philadelphia. Thank God for Mayor Wilson Goode and all he did. Thank God for the NFL and Pete Rozelle for doing what they had to do. And honestly, this is the craziest thing that's going to come out of my mouth. Thank God for Norman Brayman. Yeah. Thank God he decided to buy the team and able basically Leonard Toast to not have any say in the day-to-day operations and allow the people that were loaning the money and everything for the club boxes at the vet to come through. It's just crazy. And that's how, and if you ever wonder, and people ask all the time, why are Eagles fans the way they are? Why do you love the Eagles so much? And what do they mean? You know how much they mean? I'm thanking Wilson Goode and Norman Brayman for keeping the Eagles in Philly. That's how much they mean. Be sure to like and subscribe the pod wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to check out the YouTube channel. I'm working. I plan on taking my week off in between Christmas and New Year's to finalize some things I'm debating and working on. I kind of upgrade. I want to upgrade some of the video stuff, but there's definitely some things I want to do. I'm still trying to figure out how to do a live show. The only way to make sure you're in the loop is to like and subscribe. Check out my social media, YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter, Jimbo_Mont. I'm on Instagram at Philly Jimbo. I thank God I'm all fired up now, and I feel like I need to go in the corner and Mick to kind of cut me Mick, cut me, because I feel like this was intense. I definitely got way more heated and fired up about this than what I expected, even when I was doing the research. But like, cut me Mick, cut me. But thank God the Eagles still are in Philly. So this is Back to the Future. I'm Jim Montgomery, and until next time, I'll see you when I see you.